forgot. Can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you. Roll call.
Commissioner Austin Dillon.
Here.
Commissioner Blanky.
Here.
Commissioner Lamb. Here. Commissioner Orloff.
Here.
Commissioner Strickland has an excused absence.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on non-agendized items?
No, we don't.
None? Thank you. Item 5, consent calendar, adoption of minutes. Can I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes for November 2nd, 2021 meeting.
Second.
There's a first and second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Austin Dillon.
Yes.
Commissioner Blanky.
Yes.
Vice Chair Lamb.
Yes.
Chair Orloff.
Yes.
Motion passes 401.
Thank you. Item 6.1, general plan consistency finding. City of Rohnert Park, consideration of resolution 2021-20, finding the fiscal year 2020-2021 two-year capital improvements program is consistent with the Rohnert Park general plan 2020.
You're looking at the wrong one.
I'm looking at the, what am I thinking? Sorry about that, guys. Item 6.1, public hearing, Development Area Plan 2, Richmond American Homes, consideration of Resolution 2021-21, recommending City Council approval of Vast Oak North Development Area Plan for 26 single-family homes and landscaping on property located south of Keyser Avenue, north of Heimbach Creek, and east of Cary Road, in the Vast Oak North Phase 3A, Sandalwood at University District subdivision. With that, I'll turn it over to Anna Noel.
Yeah, just by way of introduction, Anna Noel is our new senior planner. So I think this is the first time that she's in front of you.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, Anna.
Hi there.
Anyway, and she's taken over this project from Emmanuel.
Oh, good.
Yep. Great. Anyway, with that, take it away, Anna.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, commissioners. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Tonight I will be presenting the Vast Oak North Sandalwood Development Area Plan. So as a reminder, a development area plan allows the phases of a specific plan area to be considered prior to the approval of final map. So the DAP, Development Area Plan, Phase 1 was previously approved, and that's where we considered community walls and trails and fences, that sort of thing. And then the DAP Phase 2, which is what we are considering this evening, we'll look at landscaping and architecture. So some background, the University District is north of Heimbach Creek. This is circa 2006. It was all vacant land. The university specific plan and a development agreement were adopted in 2006, which allowed for 1,645 residential units and 175,000 square feet of commercial space on roughly 300 acres of land. So fast forward to today, and we are looking at nearly a complete build out of the University District. So this is the last subdivision in the University District plan. Specifically, we are looking at 26 estate lots, which is known as the Sandalwood Development Area Plan. So Phase 3A will allow, like I had mentioned, the 26 estate lots. Each lot is at least 14,000 square feet. And it's important to mention that discretionary approval is also required for any homes over 5 bedrooms. So we're going to be considering that as well. Another reminder, in 2019, an amendment to the minimum lot size was made to reduce the lot size from 17,000 square feet to 14,000 square feet to accommodate the floodplain and bicycle trail. So this product calls for 3 separate plans, and within those 3 plans, 3 separate styles. Plan 1 is the daily style. It's 2 stories, 6 bedrooms, 3,396 square feet of living space, and an 866 square foot garage. Plan 2 is the Paulson plan, also 2 stories, 5 bedrooms, an RV garage, and also another 3-car garage, with 2,664 square feet of living space and a much larger area for garage, 1,251 square feet. And last, the Darius plan, which is a 1-story plan with 6 bedrooms, RV garage, and a 3-car garage, 2,829 square feet of living space and 602 square feet of garage space. Each of them have 3 color schemes. Each plan has 3 color schemes. And it is a little bit difficult to see it when it's projected up here, but this gives a good idea of the different textures and colors that are being proposed. The English country color schemes, and last, the wine country color schemes. Typical landscaping it's generous and attractive. I will say that a condition was added to include extra trees and shrubs to screen that RV space. That although it is set back quite a bit from the road, it was important the staff felt it was important to screen it a little bit more because it is, the RV parking is a little bit unusual, and we just wanted to make sure it was consistent with our plan and the neighborhood design. So the findings for the development area plan, this plan does conform with the specific plan, and public infrastructure and services can be provided concurrently with the development. It's pretty cut and dry on that one. Environmental review, a final EIR was adopted in 2006 with the University District specific plan with a 2014 addendum. And there is no further environmental review necessary for this project under section 15162. And of course, future construction will need to adhere to the University Development Specific Plan, final EIR and addendum, mitigation monitoring and reporting program. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission approve Resolution 2021-21, recommending that the City Council approve Development Plan Area 2, subject to the conditions of approval.
Thanks, Anna. Do we have questions for staff? Tremaine, questions for staff?
None.
None? Commissioner Blanky?
With the garages are, for the RVs are set back 52 feet, is that what I understand?
They're set back quite far.
Yeah, and then they'll have kind of a carriage feature to the garage door setting. It's not going to be an open feature, is it, for the garage?
No, it won't be open.
Yeah.
No, there is a door.
And is it going to be a kind of, I could ask,
Yeah.
kind of a carriage house kind of a feature? Or?
They're a little bit different.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
And then I like the notion of the trees there. I was going to ask the applicant a little bit more about that to make sure that they're comfortable with that. And then they're all set for solar as well. They can be.
That is a requirement, a California requirement.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And are they going to be built out with solar? Okay, great. Let's see. I think that's all I have for now. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Vice Chair Lamb?
I have no question, thank you.
I just have one, and it may be more appropriate for the applicant, I'm not sure, but the width of the streets, I was looking at the drawings, and with the cars parked on them, it seems like it would be a heck of a maneuver to get an RV out of that garage and onto that street. So I was just wondering what the width of those streets were.
They better get really used to driving an RV. Yeah, that was one of the considerations when initially it was discussed to kind of bend the driveway back so that it was even more screened from the front, but that consideration was, you know, we did consider the fact that backing an RV up or backing it in is going to be quite difficult, so.
Is there going to be any specific rules as to the length of RV that can be parked in one of those garages?
That would be an HOA
Okay.
decision, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'll wait for that question. Other than that, I don't have any other questions. All right. With that, we'll invite our applicant up to the podium. Christina Livingstone, Richmond American Homes. Good evening.
Good evening. Hi. Appreciate you guys taking the time to review our project tonight and getting this staff report to us. Yeah, I know the biggest thing is the RVs, and we just wanted to have the availability for people to not have to park their RVs on the street or in the driveways, or, you know, it just is very convenient for homeowners to have the RV garages. So yeah, any other questions that you have?
Tremaine?
No, I didn't have any questions, so thank you for your time.
Okay.
Okay. Dan, questions for applicant?
Yeah, were you folks comfortable with all the conditions as set forth by staff, and including the tree and the shrubs and all that stuff?
Yeah, we accept the conditions. Yeah.
Okay. And then the RV setup, I've seen examples of that in Idaho, and it can be actually very, very, very attractive. So if they're set up right, so just as a comment. But I don't really have any other particular questions. These are going to be, obviously, this is the end of the development, so these are going to be the high-end estate homes that we've been waiting for, and we look forward to seeing them. That's all I have, Warren.
Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Lamb?
I have no question, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, along my questions previously, is there going to be consideration in the HOAs as to the length of the motorhome that can be housed in that garage? And how, you know, and the width of the streets? I mean, as I was looking at the map or the drawings, the renderings,
Yeah.
it seemed, I didn't specifically see the width of the street. With the cars parked on it, it seemed like there was minimal space to get through. And it may just be a poor rendering, but that said, it made me think about, okay, we're going to have these motorhomes trying to back in and out of that that garage. And I think some of the larger sort of rock star, you know, motorhomes could be as long as 40 feet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm just curious as to whether or not there's consideration as to a length requirement. And if not, do you foresee any issues in regard to the parking of those RVs?
Excuse me, John Peterson. It's Christina's first time doing a presentation.
Oh, okay.
Hang around the
And your name is again, sir? I'm sorry.
John Peterson.
Hi, John.
VP with Richmond American Homes. Really, with the garages pushed back, the real consideration is being able to get into your driveway and lined up with the garage before you back in there. So you're limited by the size of the garage on the RV. I don't remember if these are 37 or 40 feet. I think there's maybe an option to extend them, and I have to look at that. We've done that in some places, but the driveways are pushed back 50 feet. So making that turn, having that room to come in the driveway and having 50 feet to line up before you go in the garage should make it fairly easy if you're used to driving an RV to get it in there. The doors are wide enough to accommodate with extra room, and you are lined up with the garage before you actually go through the door. So if they were closer to the street, I think the consideration would be, because you're trying to make that turn, hit the garage, the trailer's still turning as you're coming in. With the 50 feet back, you're going to be lined up with the garage before you ever enter. So there shouldn't be an issue there.
Okay.
I would like to add also that these are city standard streets.
Yeah,
These are
okay.
not private streets, so they are built to accommodate larger vehicles
Okay.
per city standards.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? No? Okay. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I would like to make a motion for item 6.1, Public Hearing Development Area Plan 2, Richmond American Homes consideration of resolution 2021-21 recommending City Council approve a Vast Oak North Development Area Plan for 26 single-family homes and landscaping on property located north of Kaiser Avenue, north of Heinenbaugh Creek, east of Cary Road in the Vast Oak North Phase 3A subdivision.
Is there a second?
Second?
First and second, roll call, please.
Commissioner Austin Dillon,
Yes.
Commissioner Blanky,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lamb,
Yes.
Chair Orloff.
Yes.
Motion passes 401.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, item 6.2. Master Sign Program, file number PLS 21-0013. Consideration of Resolution 2021-22 approving a master sign program for the Commons Shopping Center located at 4 Padre Parkway. I'd like to introduce Assistant Planner Susie Azevedo. Welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner or Chairperson Orloff and members of the Planning Commission. Tonight, we are going to be taking a look at an amendment to an existing sign program for the Commons, which is previously known as Padre Town Center, located at 1 through 5 Padre Parkway. So a little bit of background. These two parcels are located in the mixed-use district, which allows for 200 square foot of signage per lot of record, which may be exceeded with the sign program. The project site consists of two parcels, primarily retail, restaurant, and office uses. And the program will ensure that compliance with sign program standards for fair and equitable signage is throughout the site. So the amendment to the sign program will consist of the reuse of 3 existing monument signs, removal of 1 directory sign structure, sign copy changes to 2 remaining directory signs, individual tenant sign allocation and associated lighting, and allowance for secondary lettering per private entry, which is 20% of the glazed area of the tenant space. So here's the location map showing. Let me see if I can get this to work. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 right there. Oh, wait, it's 1, 2, oh, this is not working. No, I'll just go to the next one. So here is a detail of where those existing signs are located. The one that is going to be removed was on the Commerce side up near Building 1. Here's a look at the elevation drawing. Again, they're reusing and repurposing the existing structures. Also in your packet, you have the details on what the materials and the colors will be. So with that, the staff is recommending adoption of resolution number 2021-22, approving an amendment to the master sign program for the Commons Mixed Use Center.
Thank you, Susie. Commissioner Austin Dillon, questions for staff?
Yeah, it's the name for me, the Commons. It sounds like there's some history there. Like, can you explain a little bit of how it got to be named that? It used to be called something else, but what's
Yeah, we do have the applicant, Mr. Slumsky is here,
Okay.
and he could probably better.
better? Okay, then I have no questions.
Yeah.
Right now.
Mr. Blanky?
I don't have any questions.
Vice Chair Lamb?
I have no question.
No questions. I have no questions. Thank you. At this point, we're going to open a public meeting, public comment. And I'll invite Bill Sumsky to the podium, our applicant.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi.
Happy to answer any questions. I certainly can give some background on it's an old property, as we know, built back in the 70s, and it's gone through many different iterations. We acquired it about 5 years ago. And in those 5 years, we took it from about 35, 40% leased up to now, where about 85% leased. We've added some terrific tenants. Boost Mobile lease just signed, they're coming in. National Cell Retailer. We have a local clothing store that's coming in next to Boost. We brought in Creative Care, which is adult daycare for disabled seniors. Center for Social Dynamics, which treats autism patients. So a lot of great different types of uses. We've, through the pandemic, worked with our hair salon, our barber shop, Kyoto, our restaurant, to make sure they stay in business. So when we kind of looked at the name and the history, Padre really didn't apply and it didn't sink in. What the center really is, it's a neighborhood center. I know we have Wells Fargo, but you know, people come there to do their banking, and it's a community. So we thought, given the location in what is the downtown district, and that it really is somewhere where you come to get service, we thought the Commons would be just a great name for it. So that's really how it came to pass. There's no magic in it other than we thought it was time to modernize the look of the center, and with that, it was time for a name change to bring it up to date.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay. Commissioner Blanky?
No questions from me, thank you.
Vice Chair Lamb?
No question. Thank you.
I just have one. Is Wells Fargo going to be the only entity in the Commons that has it? It looks like it has a standalone sign.
Yes.
And so is that because they face the expressway and they're the only, I guess, property on there, or is there some special reason for that?
It's what the lease lets them have.
Okay.
So, yeah, we need to honor the lease that's in place, so.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
You're welcome.
I have no other questions. I'll turn it back to questions. Any other questions for staff? Tremaine, no? Dan?
No, nothing from me.
Fanny? No? Okay. Great. And I shouldn't have banged my gavel, my apologies, but I'll entertain a motion at this point.
I'll go ahead and make a motion that we approve a sign program for the Common Shopping Center at I-5 Padre Parkway.
Is there a second? I have a first and second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Austin Dillon,
Yes.
Commissioner Blanky,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lamb,
Yes.
Chair Orloff.
Yes.
Motion passes 401.
Thank you.
Susie's hard work, really appreciated. Thank you so much on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Item 6.3, presentation, the sixth cycle housing element. And I'd like to welcome Jenna Garcia, our housing administrator. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, planning commissioners. Glad to be joining you tonight. Give me a minute while I get set up over here. So this is kind of a means of introduction about what we'll be talking about tonight. This is really sort of your first look at the upcoming housing elements. So while this is, a first conversation about it, it is by no means the last conversation. You'll be hearing lots more about it in the coming months. I don't know how many folks are familiar with the housing element or may have been involved the last go round. I think perhaps at least one of you probably was. And as you'll hear tonight, there's a lot of things that have changed, a lot of laws that have changed. This is going to provide sort of a high-level overview. I'm going to rush through a few of the slides, not dwell on all of the fine points, but you did receive the PowerPoint PDF ahead of time if you want to go back and kind of dwell on some of those. Also, I want to encourage folks, if it's okay with the chair, we can make this a little bit more informal. So if you want to interrupt me and ask questions as I'm talking, sometimes it's a little bit more helpful rather than trying to wait till the end.
Sure, no problem.
Great. So the PowerPoint, just to give credit where credit's due, was created by our consultant, 4Leaf. They gave this presentation to the City Council last month. Unfortunately, I'm the one who has to give it to you tonight, but we'll kind of go through these different things here. So first up, just a little agenda about what we're going to talk about. So overview of what the housing element is, and RHNA, that's the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, sites inventory and other new laws that have come to pass, select Rohnert Park demographics, our project timeline and next steps, and then we'll have an official time for some questions, discussion, and community input. So first of all, very importantly, what is a housing element? So sort of broad level, housing element is an element in the general plan. However, unlike all the other elements in the general plan, it is updated every 8 years. So it doesn't follow the general plan cycle of every 20 years. There's also a lot of requirements around it, as we'll talk about a little bit more. It's very legislated, so to speak, by the state, and we are required to have a certified housing element. The housing element period that we're in right now, known as the 5th cycle, is going to be expiring at the end of 2022, so it ran 2015 to 2022. What's included in the housing element from a kind of high-level perspective, this is intended to plan for the housing needs of the community. And that includes housing needs by income level. So it includes policies and programs, site inventory, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And then AFFH is the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. There's quite a bit of requirements around that, which is new to this cycle of the housing element. So this upcoming element will cover an 8-year planning period, 2023 to 2031. It'll include site inventory that will ensure that there is sufficient zoning for housing to meet our regional housing needs allocation for Rohnert Park, which we'll talk about in a few slides. It'll include policies and programs to help meet those requirements. And then it needs to check a lot of statutory requirements at the state level, including what I mentioned before, affirmatively furthering fair housing. So housing element 101, like I mentioned earlier, the state law mandates that local governments adequately plan to meet existing and projected housing needs for all economic segments of the community. So high level, that's what the housing element is intended to do. Unlike other general plan elements, it is required to undergo state HCD review for compliance with state law. HCD is the Housing and Community Development Department of the state. They oversee everything housing, homelessness, and a few other things too. The housing element is required to be updated according to the statutory schedule, which is that 8-year planning cycle. And the upcoming one is the 6th planning cycle covering 2023 through 2031.
So,
yeah, go
question.
ahead.
Why is it only 6? It seems like it'd be more than that, no? I guess not. 6 cycles? Like, why is this the 6th one?
I think Jeff might know the answer for that. Were you around for the first cycle, Jeff?
No, just at some point they started counting.
Oh, just when they started? Okay, that makes more sense.
It's and it's all related to basically different regions of the state have different start at different times. So like Southern California, some was last year, and then the Sacramento area is in a different cycle, and so this is the 6th time that the Bay Area has done the cycle. So the whole Bay Area is in the 6th cycle.
Okay, got it.
And another thing too, I mean, I think a lot of the housing element law goes back to, I want to say like the late 60s. So I'd imagine that shortly after some of those state laws were passed, when they started requiring the housing elements, when they said, okay, now it's your first cycle. But to Jeff's point, this particular 8-year cycle is based on the Association of Bay Area Governments, which is a 9-county Bay Area, government organization for, this area as well as the other 8 Bay Area counties in the Bay Area, I guess. So Sonoma County being the northernmost one of those. So the benefits of being HCD certified, there's a lot of benefits to being certified. There's a lot of disadvantages to not being certified. There's a presumption of legal adequacy. If we experience litigation, we're able to avoid certain litigation and attorney general government involvement, maintain discretionary review over housing projects, and then maintain eligibility for state funding for a variety of things, including housing, parks, transit, bike lanes, pedestrian improvements, et cetera. So a lot of funding sources at the state level require that you have a certified housing element, and more over the last few years, and I'll have a slide that shows this, there's been a lot of legislation around housing that has taken away a lot of local controls, around housing and has basically streamlined it at the state level. And there's been a lot of bills that have empowered the Attorney General to go after bad actors. So cities and counties deemed to not be meeting, the requirements and fulfilling, the housing needs of their community or standing in the way of housing projects.
And I'll say the most common thing that the state will do is the last bullet. They won't give you grant funding.
Yeah.
So that's usually the most effective way too. If you tell cities they're not going to get any money, then they all of a sudden adopt a housing element. So.
And does that deal with homeless entitlements and that kind of state funding issue? Does that offer any relief there being part of this?
So while the housing element does address homelessness, because I think there's a realization that homelessness is sort of along that spectrum, right? It's,
right.
It's directly related to a problem of insufficient housing at affordable levels. Yeah. There's not legislation right now that I'm aware of that ties, issues around homelessness to the housing element, where they would go after you if you're not being compliant. I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
I can add.
I think I was looking for entitlements, some assistance to the city in its governance of the homeless and the assets that are available to the city for homelessness and those kinds of attributes. It's a big issue in this city.
Yeah, it's the other big hat I wear, probably bigger than the housing hat, to be honest, a lot of the time. So two answers to that question. First of all, on the legislative end or the litigation end, almost everything related to homelessness and enforcement around homelessness is being worked out in the courts, not in the legislature.
Okay.
So that's a big difference from housing laws, which are being worked out in the state legislature. As far as funding to address homelessness, the governor has put an unprecedented amount of funding into homelessness in the last few years, and it looks like the federal government is likely to do so as well with some of these bills that are making their way through Congress, like Build Back Better. So we certainly are seeing a lot more funding that's being available, including Home Key, which you may have heard of. The city applied for $15 million that would allow us to build interim housing here in Rohnert Park for people experiencing homelessness to get them off the streets. I think you'll see some of those types of policies and programs built into the housing element, again, because it's along that spectrum. But I actually don't know if housing element was necessarily a requirement of that particular application, but it sure doesn't hurt.
And I don't want to detract from what our goal is here tonight, but I'm very interested in the homeless element, and maybe that should be the subject of another session. But I am very interested, and I'd like to talk about those resources and availability and what our strategic plan is going forward with that. And so I don't want to detract from what you need to do here tonight, but it keeps coming up, it cycles in my mind that I keep thinking it as a very visible problem in our community, and it's not just our community, it's a statewide problem, and it's a
Yeah, and I'll say,
national
and
problem.
I would say you will have opportunity to talk about it, but even through the housing element, because we will have policies in the housing element which will specifically address homeless issues and homeless
Okay.
response and programs. So, so this,
This is appropriate, then?
yes, yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
definitely related.
Okay.
Yep.
If I can add to that, I'm just, in the line of business I'm in, there's a lot of definitions and applications that apply. And so I'm just curious as to, how is housing defined? Because, when we're talking about homelessness, we can talk about transitional housing, we could talk about, but you could get down to basically the nuts and bolts of it. You can look at, should there be homeless parks because a house might be a tent? I mean, what's the definition of housing, and how is it applied in this circumstance?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we probably could have a whole dissertation just on that, right?
Okay.
I think, from a big picture perspective, and Jeff, feel free to weigh in on this, there is a very specific building code definition of housing that meets certain habitability requirements. And within the world of homeless services, the goal is to get people into permanent housing that meets those habitability requirements. A tent is not permanent housing. A vehicle is not permanent housing.
Okay.
An RV without appropriate hookups is not permanent housing because it doesn't check those habitability boxes. So I think generally when we're talking about housing, especially permanent housing, which is, I'm saying permanent housing versus interim or transitional,
Sure.
right? We are looking for something that meets, that level of habitability where people can live there and thrive there and be safe and secure long term.
Okay, thank you.
That's awesome, yeah. Encourage that.
Yeah, good questions. So the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, is a really important part of this discussion. So this is the projection of housing units needed to accommodate household growth at all income levels by 2031. So we are required by the state to zone for our, quote, fair share of the region's identified housing need. Affordability assumptions are linked to density and zoning. So in the top right corner there, you can see what the draft RHNA looks like for the upcoming cycle for Rohnert Park. And you can see that those are broken down by income levels. So these income levels, if you're not familiar with these, this is based on area median income. So every year, the state does this survey to determine area median income for every county. And then based on where that area median income is, 100% of that, you kind of go up and down and say this is considered very low, which is 30%, low, which is 50% or less, and then moderate's 120% or less, and then above moderate's all of our fair market or market rate homes. So what we are required to zone for in the upcoming cycle is that big number on the right, 1,580. You may be curious how that compares to the current cycle, which our big number for the current cycle is 899. So just about 900. So not quite double, but a pretty substantial increase. And as I'll show you on a future slide, this is actually well under the increase of a lot of other cities and counties in the Bay Area. One of the things that the state is doing when they give the big number to ABAG, because that's what happened. 2 years ago, they gave a big number to ABAG and said, okay, figure out a methodology to break this down to all the jurisdictions that are in your 9 counties, and make everyone very unhappy in the process, right? So that was like a 2-year process. They're in the process right now of finalizing appeals, although I don't think they accepted many, if any, of the appeals. They definitely didn't consider any of the appeals coming from Sonoma County, which I think there were 3. But they will, I think ABAG Executive Board, which Councilmember Adams sits on as well for the county, along with Supervisor Rabbit, I think they're going to be finalizing these draft numbers next week is when they'll be meeting up.
So is that like all single homes?
No, those are all units. So
Okay.
yeah, units of any kind, apartment units, homes, et cetera.
Okay.
So yeah, so we can meet these needs. Like for example, this year, we had, or this cycle, I should say, we had 218 units that became available at Redwoods at University District, which was an all-affordable housing apartment complex in the University District. That's how they met their inclusionary housing requirements. And so we got to count those against these numbers in here. Of course, these ones are for next cycle, but the equivalent for the current cycle.
So these numbers are based on nothing that's currently on the books, right? So this is all new to be determined housing.
This is all stuff that's going to be permitted in the next cycle, which is 2023 to 2031. Now, when you say on the books, I mean, think of how long SOMO was on the books, right? And it's finally getting permitted.
But
So
that's in the prior cycle, right?
No, we're going to be able to count it because it's actually,
Okay.
when we count it is when it's permitted.
Oh, okay.
Not when it's entitled, and definitely not when it's included in the general plan.
Oh, okay. So it's based on permit date. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we'll talk about this in a minute. A lot of jurisdictions are getting really worried about being able to zone enough sites for these numbers because it's increased so much. In Rohnert Park, we don't really have that particular problem. Being able to ensure we meet these affordabilities is a lot more challenging because it requires much more financing to close affordability gaps. But the big number will definitely be on track for.
Okay.
I have a
What-
question,
I'm
sorry. I may have missed it. So 1580, the number was based on population of the city or based on, how do they decide that number?
So there's a long answer. I'll give you the shorter answer if possible. There was a housing methodology committee on which Councilmember Adams served for our county, along with another local planner. And they came up with a whole kind of sophisticated methodology to determine how to take, I'm going to go to the next slide real quick, that big number, the 441,176 units, and figure out what each city and county share is going to be. So they took into account, probably 5 or 6 different factors, including proximity to employment and, the current income levels of people that are living there. There was a whole bunch of different things that were factored into it. But basically what the state says is we're going to give you this big number, and you, under ABAG, the Housing Methodology Committee met with ABAG, and it included at least 2 representatives from every county. They came up with a methodology to take that and separate it out and give everybody their share.
So I have a question. So it seems like the housing unit is a goal. I mean, what happens if, it seems like cities time and time again fall short. So what is the consequence for a lack of compliance, and what are the ramifications to the city for that?
That is the question. And our state legislature, it continues to consider, more bills and sign, and authorize and then sign into law bills that take away a lot of local controls around it because of folks that, cities and counties that do stand in the way sometimes of housing development. For the sake of the housing element, our obligation is to ensure we have sufficient sites zoned to meet 1,580 units. The city is not a developer. We can, make it as conducive as possible, as a city can, to, develop. And I think that Rohnert Park does a really good job of this. But, we are not going to turn into developers, and we don't have, tons of money in coffers to put into affordable housing. So we find creative ways to try to incentivize it.
And I will say the city of Rohnert Park has played it pretty straight over the years, where we've, all the housing elements, we've had plenty of zoned land. We've actually gotten quite a bit of housing production, so we've always tried to, we've definitely always satisfied the housing element requirement, and we've built a lot of housing. Some jurisdictions have kind of played a little free and loose with the rules, where they'll like designate a bunch of vacant land that's in a floodplain or in a wetland or really not developable at all, but they just kind of throw it in there just to get their housing element through. And the state's starting to kind of crack down on that type of behavior a little bit.
Good.
So it's not, but as far as the city of Rohnert Park is concerned, we've always kind of done a pretty good job of, with housing elements.
And I certainly didn't mean to infer that at all, that I think that the city is failing in that regard. Because I know that we do take it very seriously in that responsibility.
I wasn't suggesting
But I was
that.
just thought, as a generic statement, I see these goals and I don't see any
Yeah,
consequence
there's
to
lots
it.
of jurisdictions that
Yeah.
never get anywhere close to their RENA.
And then it
So-
gets to an issue of the enforcement of the low-income housing. And
Right.
we've seen examples of that in the Press Democrat today in Santa Rosa about the abuses and so forth, and which is another set of problems for you fine folks and the resources that are necessary to marshal into to making sure that these homes are being utilized properly for the reasons that are already identified and
Right.
sorely needed in our with workforce communities.
You ain't lying.
Right.
You ain't lying.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're on the right track for sure. And one thing I will say is, you know, in recent years, the state has made the stick bigger and bigger and bigger with housing, but the carrot is really small. You know, and this is every time that there's, you know, a give feedback to the state on their program survey that gets passed my way, that's what I say.
Right.
You know, we need to have more financial resources to be able to incentivize, in particular, these lower income units.
Which brings my question. You know, we had an opportunity on a location near the Costco old stadium site that was supposedly going to be low income. And at this point, while not approved yet, they're on their year extension. They came back to us and it's now not low income. And that would have satisfied probably half of those numbers there. And the reason they didn't do it was because of financing.
Yeah.
And so if we have developers who can't get financing for low income housing, how are we going to meet the need of 399 units when we already had an opportunity to basically, I think it was 172 units we could have blown out in this cycle.
Well, and the communication of providing incentives from some of these resources would be of paramount importance to meeting those goals. It would, if we can incentivize developers to participate in that with some of this funding, then we can do a better job of meeting the goals.
Well, and I'll go one step further, and maybe it's, you know, not an appropriate comment, but I'm going to make it anyway. You know, we had the same opportunity in W section, and basically what happened was the community in that area did not want low housing, and the city council backed them. And so that bothers me too, when we have these opportunities to meet these standards and they're not being met. I think it's going to be fairly easy to meet the higher end, the moderate and the above moderate, because we have Somo Village coming in.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how we're going to meet the standards on the lower end.
Yeah, and to temper those remarks, I think that our city does a much better job than most in terms of trying to meet those needs, and I think we continue to bring this forward in our dialogue and conversations about the importance and try to balance the interests of those that are developing versus the interests of our workforce housing needs and the various other needs that are clearly defined in this. And it's a huge problem, and it's a challenge, not just for us, for the whole United States.
Well, and if the state's not going to offer incentives, you know, for our developers who, I mean, it seemed like some of them wanted to build low-income housing, and it didn't pencil out.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yep, that, Terracina, Adega Phase 2,
Yeah.
right, is a perfect
Right.
example of where you need substantial financing to be able to close that
Yeah.
financing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, we're having good
Probably preaching to the
dialogue. So that's how the housing need determination comes up, and I do think RENA is one of those things that, is more of a stick than a carrot, but, we'll continue to advocate any chance we get to say, hey, bring back more tools for being able to finance these types of things like we used to have under redevelopment.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is Rohnert Park almost the best in following these rules and compared to all other cities in Sonoma County?
We're doing pretty doggone good compared to other cities in Sonoma County. The last time I saw, as far as big numbers, like a year ago, we were outproducing Santa Rosa, which if not even per capita, just flat numbers. Of course, that fluctuates, and sometimes things move faster, and you end up with more units in one year than another one. But as far as Sonoma County is concerned, we have a great reputation for producing a lot of housing. Because of our DAs and requirements to provide 15% on-site inclusionary, we are meeting some of these, kind of going back a little, we are meeting some of these categories. The ones that we struggle with, we're definitely on track with the low income. And we are way exceeding on above moderate already.
Yeah.
The very low income is the hardest to finance because it's the biggest finance gap, right? It costs $500,000 to $600,000 per unit to build something. And how much can you actually recoup in rent? It's the smallest, so you have this much more, you have to fill the gap on the financing side. And then the moderate income is a little bit odd. That's 120%. The reason that's hard to fulfill is because there's not a lot of the financing that's out there, like tax credits, targets more steep affordability. It doesn't target 120% of area median income. So you have to find that in other ways. And Adega Phase 2 will have, I think, 8 moderate income units. Redwood Crossing will have a handful too. So we'll make up some of the difference there. But that one is a harder category to meet.
And we did convince the state last time that ADUs can count in that category. So
Right.
we kind of have to make that analysis to do that. But
We count every ADU in that
every
category.
ADU, we don't get very many ADUs, but
Thank you.
So just to see how we sort of compare for the upcoming cycle with RENA with the other jurisdictions in the county, you can see the big number there on the bottom right, 14,262 for the entire county. Rohnert Park, oh, you know what, I think, was this one incorrect? Yes. The first Rohnert Park should say Katati. I forgot to change that before this one. But the second one that's actually bold, that's the real number.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't know I could do that. So that second Rohnert Park, I don't know if my clicker's working. This one right here.
Right, that's us.
That's us. This one
Yeah.
up here actually
Yes,
should say
Katati.
Katati.
Okay.
So just pretend. But you can kind of see where we all fit in for the upcoming cycle. So the RENA process and timeline, this isn't the housing element process because RENA's got to get done so that we can get started on the housing element and know what our numbers are. But basically, the HCD issued the big regional housing needs determination in June 2019. Then there was a whole housing methodology committee I talked about before. Earlier this year, HCD reviewed the proposed methodology. There was a final methodology and draft adopted. And now that we're at the end of 2021, the final versions of those allocations are going to be approved. And I think we'll probably be landing exactly where we are showing on the previous slide here. I think everybody is probably going to be landing here. So RENA and the housing element, I think I've already talked through most of this stuff, but basically, it goes from HCD, they bring down that big number, ABAG gets that, and then has to figure out how to distribute it to every jurisdiction. And then we update, all the cities and counties update our housing elements based on the big RENA number that we get locally. And then we have to ensure that we've got sufficient land zoned to accommodate that number of units. And then we will finalize our housing element, get it to the HCD, they certify it, And then jurisdiction have presumption of validity and local control.
Can you go back one slide with the numbers? Yeah.
Oh, this one.
That one, yeah. So below numbers for like Sebastopol or Windsor, which I would have thought would have been higher, are those based upon the fact that they don't have enough zonable land for housing?
Not necessarily. It's more based on it's based on a lot of different factors, but the numbers are based in part on their population. So they're much smaller cities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Windsor's, this doesn't show what it was the current cycle, but Windsor's went up substantially over the current cycle, and they were one of the jurisdictions that filed an appeal because of that.
Thank you.
So new state housing laws, I won't dwell on this too much, but just to highlight some of them, this is a list of some of the housing element laws that have been passed just in the last couple of years. Does not include the ones that were signed into law a couple of months ago, but it just gives you an idea of just how many laws have changed since the last housing element that we did. And this doesn't include just general housing legislation like the ADU laws that changed recently, or SB 9, SB 10. This is just housing element laws. I want to highlight a couple of these for you all. First is the inventory of housing sites. So I've talked about this before. We have to have an inventory that shows that we can, we have enough sites zoned to be able to meet our RHNA. By income level, and we have to have it with appropriate zoning based on default density. The goal of this particular legislation is to ensure that there's adequate suitable sites for housing remaining during the entire 8-year planning period. So we do have to zone for all types of housing.
Question again, sorry.
Yeah.
The current cycle, seems like we had an item, I don't know if it was a year or two ago, as to the current numbers that we had within the current cycle, and it seemed like we weren't going to make some of those projections. What happens when you're short during a cycle? Do those get pushed over to the next cycle, or are these numbers solid for 2023 to 2031?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now there's no legislation that rolls over excesses or deducts, from your current cycle to the next cycle.
That's what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, there is some discussion about, and some suggestion that we might be allowed to roll over excesses. So if we're over in a certain category, which we are right now in the low category,
Right.
We'd love to be able to apply those extras to the next cycle. That's not something that the legislature has considered formally yet.
Okay.
So suitable sites versus RHNA. This is a kind of fun slide that just shows you have RHNA and then you have your sites. In the city of Rohnert Park, we are pretty fortunate that this doesn't apply to us the same way that it does for other jurisdictions. There are some jurisdictions in our county that are scrambling right now to figure out how to ensure they have enough sites zoned to meet their RHNA number, because that's the most important thing from the state certification perspective. And there, yeah, the sites can go lower. SB 166 is known as the No Net Loss Bill. So that basically what that says is if we zone exactly 1,580 units, and some of those sites end up being converted into something that's not housing, then we just lost the number of units that were set aside for that particular, for housing, in the site inventory. So we need to make sure that we zone for more than our RHNA number. So if some of those sites, and I'll give you an example in a minute, but if some of those sites end up being converted into something that's not housing, developed into something that's not housing, we don't lose,
Right.
On the other end. So, one example is the Southwest Shopping Center. That area is zoned for mixed use, which mixed use could go housing, business, or both, right? So we have, a specific number of units that we're assuming could be, built there for housing. It's in our inventory for the current cycle of the housing element. If all of that got built as business, then we wouldn't be able to use that to count towards sufficient zoning for housing. So we're just going to zone more than what we need to be on the safe side. A couple more, AB 72 and AB 215. These strengthen the housing element law, gives more enforcement authority, like we talked about before. HCD can revoke compliance if, you know, in the middle of the cycle, even if you were deemed compliant up front, but if you're not continuing to be compliant. And they can refer to the Attorney General for non-compliance with a variety of different things here. I will say I'm not too concerned for Rohnert Park when it comes to this, but I think it does highlight that there are some cities that are deemed to be bad actors, that are, you know, trying to get housing elements through to check boxes, but not necessarily intending to follow through with the goals that are in them. So the state is strengthening their litigation power. Statutory requirements for public participation. So one of the most important things about the housing element, and as you're very familiar with, you know, all of our elements in the general plan, is sufficient public engagement, you know, in the process, and making sure that we're developing programs and policies that are based on real people's real experiences. So we want to include meaningful community engagement throughout the process, discussion of which groups participated, what the comments were received, how comments were incorporated in the housing element. We've already started a little bit. As Tremaine knows, I was at the districting event on Saturday handing out flyers for a survey. You all will be receiving an email from me next week with a little information about the housing element, how to complete the survey, how to share it with folks. We'll also be putting stuff up on social media and in a variety of different places to try to get some meaningful engagement. That'll be sort of our first round, will be the survey, but then we'll have opportunities for people to participate in focus groups, you know, in community-based organization focused groups, as well as, you know, other focus groups. Affirmatively furthering fair housing. So I want to talk about this just briefly. This says that you need to have programs that constitute meaningful actions to address disparities in housing needs and in access to opportunities. I want to emphasize that this is not a new program or new idea under federal law and HUD. This came about, this program came about under the Obama administration, but it was adopted by California specifically within the last 8 years. So it's new to us in the housing element. But what it says is that we need to make sure that when we designate certain sites for lower income housing, we're doing it with a lens of affirmatively furthering fair housing. So that means sites are dispersed throughout the community. They're not, you know, in one area specifically. We are building housing in high opportunity areas near good schools and so on. And that sites in lower income areas need to also be accompanied by programs that create more opportunities for folks living there. So also a FFH, as it's called, we need to collect and analyze data around fair housing and enforcement, identify patterns of segregation, areas of racial or ethnic concentration, identify fair housing policies and programs to implement them. Sites in the inventory need to make sure they are affirmatively furthering fair housing. And then there's a little definition there at the bottom about what AFFH means. SB 35 and SB 9 are ministerial approvals. These are some of the bills that have passed recently. SB 9 is the most recent one, which requires streamlined ministerial review of housing projects. And that means that local officials do not have the ability to exercise discretion in their review and decision-making around that housing. And that includes, you know, taking away local decision-making at the Planning Commission and City Council level, but also at the administrative level, where there might have been opportunity for some discretion. Now, you know, it's all objective design, which, you know, is, I don't know if Jeff's talked about this at all, but, you know, this emphasizes the importance of having adopted objective design standards that we can use consistently across the board when projects do come in.
Good.
So select demographics, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly right now because you'll have an opportunity to see this again when we come up with our draft housing element. And you can take a look at it in the PowerPoint we set ahead of time. But this includes information about population trends, population age trends over time, housing tenure, so owner-occupied versus renter-occupied, housing tenure by age, household income tenure by age, or income level by tenure, sorry. So this is by tenure, owner-occupied versus renter-occupied. Housing tenure by housing type, so detached single-family homes, attached multifamily versus mobile homes. Household size by tenure, and then overall household size. Cost burden by race, so how much are people spending towards their rent and other monthly household payments related to their housing. Disability by type for seniors over 65. Yeah, so I won't get into the nitty-gritties of all of those because we could unpack those all night, but that'll be a key part of the housing element, is bringing forward data that will provide more information about how to develop policies to meet the needs of our communities. So housing element needs includes identify the housing needs in RENA, the statutory requirements, new law, and AFFH, community input, and then policy, programs, and sites. So our project objectives for the 2021 housing element update is to meet local housing needs. We want to cater the programs and policies to the needs of this community. We want to ensure that there are adequate sites, as we've already talked about, and then ultimately achieve state certification. So what are our next steps? Outreach and engagement input, like I mentioned, we've already kicked that off, and you'll be hearing more about that next week and then in the coming months. Data collection and issues, constraints and opportunities, get a better sense of what the issues are in Rohnert Park. Drafting the housing strategy and preliminary sites inventory and the fair housing analysis and AFFH program of actions. And then we get to the draft housing element, which is when you all will start to see this, like you did for other elements. Ultimately, the HCD, the state review process, is about 60 days, and then we'll be going through the adoption hearings. So we're going to be starting this in earnest. Well, we have started it in earnest, but this next year, 2022, will be the housing element year. So you'll be seeing a lot more of this in the coming year, and with the goal of adopting the final version at the City Council in November, so we can get it to HCD in time for their certification.
I have a question about outreach. Is outreach a process just to adopt this for the coming 8 years, or is a continuous process throughout the 8-year cycle?
So there's sort of a yes and a yes to that. The official outreach we're talking about right now is related to what's going to go in the housing element, but ultimately what's going to go in the housing element is programs and policies. So if one of the policies or programs that continues is some sort of regular outreach and engagement, maybe with a certain small subset, like community-based organization, that is something that could be considered.
So currently, in the current cycle, do we have any outreach programs?
Nothing official in between the cycles, yeah.
Is there any thought about where these homes are going to be built? Like, are we going to be looking to build homes that are in high density areas or anything like that to make sure that they have access to public transportation and et cetera?
Yeah, so I mean, that's sort of even a bigger question at the city of like, where do we build housing? And that's something that you all talk about all the time, probably in these planning commission meetings and, as part of your general plan, as you consider different sites and what purposes you want to see at different sites and how you want zoning to be. The housing element in particular, I think Jeff can probably add to this, but, it's not taking over sort of the big picture plan for the city. Like the general plan is sort of that big picture, and the housing element is really focused on the housing component of it. But, the goals and priorities of the community, including where those are located, does need to be part of the discussion.
Yeah, I think probably where housing goes really is more in the community development element of the general plan. And what you'll see over the next year is we got, our general plan was intended to be adopted already originally, but we got a little bit sidetracked with, this thing called COVID and all that. But anyway, so because we've had a delay in the big general plan section, which has, 11 elements, and housing element is just one of them. Over this next year, the general plan and the housing element projects are going to kind of merge together and become one at some point. So we will be kind of looking at that big picture, where does all the housing go and the housing element at the same time. And so if you look at that community development element, you'll notice that we have housing kind of in the central Rohnert Park, kind of downtown area near the SMART station. And then we have new housing that's going to go down in Somo, which is also kind of proximate to a SMART station and transit. And then there's the kind of the newer housing that's going to continue to develop in University District and Willow Glen. And we might even get some new housing in Northeast eventually. So, and then there's even some housing that's over on the west side in Northwest Pacific Plan. So yeah, so it's kind of already kind of apportioned out based on our current general plan. Yep.
It sort of dawned on me, and sorry that Chuck couldn't be here tonight, because I'm sure he would be asking these questions instead of me. But I mean, there are obviously environmental factors that go into where you put housing, how much housing you can build. I mean, he's a water guy. He probably would be asking you questions about water sustainability and viability over the next 8 years. I know I've read recent articles that seem to indicate that drought conditions are going to continue for the foreseeable future. Is any of that being considered when we're talking about these numbers and where we put housing and in what communities? We're fortunate in Rohnert Park with the condition of our aquifer. Some communities are not in the same place as we are.
Yeah, there will be a water supply assessment that'll go along with the general plan. It'll be kind of part of the CEQA document. So yeah, we will pretty much know that we have enough water for all of the housing units that we're accommodating in the general plan. So we are in pretty good shape. We are in better shape than a lot of other jurisdictions in that respect. So
okay.
Yeah, I was pretty blown away with the water presentation that we had a couple weeks ago. It's like,
yeah.
Very interesting. I did have another question though. When you were speaking earlier, you had mentioned that the unhoused may not be addressed in this particular, I guess, document or whatever. So how do we, because I imagine a lot of the feedback, I could be wrong, is going to be about unhoused. And so how do you address that, even though this may not be the right venue or avenue? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so let me clarify. I think I may have misspoken a little earlier. I was referencing the litigation around housing elements. The housing element document itself is the right place to identify policies and programs related to addressing homelessness. And it certainly is and will be a topic that we bring up in discussions and outreach and then bringing back ideas around programs and policies. We have a lot of programs and policies in place around homelessness already right now. So some of that stuff may be, here's what we're doing now, what else do we want to see, and how do we want this to look over the next 8 years? But that will be part of the discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think for just immediate consumption by the citizens, I think it is important that we notify them about these resources that are available. I mean, I'm getting asked all the time about this stuff, and I think it is important. And I know that there's resources available, and I know that we do our best to communicate that. But maybe we can make that an emphasis going forward in communications to to the public, whether it be on our website, whether it be in any notices we send home to our people with the utility usage, you know, the water, that kind of thing, sending out information to the public about the homeless issue and the resources available. I just think it's good communication. And if our city manager is I know he writes articles and he does things. I just think it's topical. I just think it's something that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be more at the front of I think, the communications right now. I just think it's very topical.
Yeah, so, this is slightly off topic from this, but I think very, very relevant. And you're right, we're hearing about it all the time too, so this is, a top concern of citizens. And we actually are doing a pretty comprehensive outreach effort right now, which doesn't mean it gets to everyone,
No, of course not.
It's always sort of a trying, like try the blasts and try to do the things, and you hope that people see it, through the various methods. But we've got a very robust set of web pages on our website that were just updated again about homelessness, the services that we provide. We do a monthly homelessness roundtable that's open to the community. Lisa Orloff is a very active member of that group, and I know Fanny's joined us as well in the past. And the goal of that is to do a lot of education, and connection with the services that exist. But the latest thing that we actually just implemented earlier this week, and we put out our first post on Tuesday, is a weekly post blast. So a campaign just addressing the questions and issues that come up over and over and over again around homelessness, and why aren't we doing more, and how can we make this thing go away, and all the questions that come up pretty frequently. So this first post, which was on Tuesday, was specifically about enforcement in the courts and what cities are able to do and not able to do around enforcement because of what courts have ruled on. And then we're going to have a whole bunch of different topics in the coming weeks. So,
and where are these posted?
So those are posted on both the Facebook page for public safety and the city government Facebook page, the Nixle Community Alert, and Nextdoor.
Okay.
And this is, I think your comment highlights exactly why we are doing this, because we are hearing a lot from people that they want to hear more about this issue. With that said, I would be more than happy to get an email out to this whole group with a link to the city website.
Perfect.
With our series of homelessness pages. And, we are asking folks, and, as planning commissioners, you're also ambassadors of the city, to help try to get the word out about what is being done about various things. But we are trying to direct people to the city's website.
That would be awesome. I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, be happy to.
Thank you.
And, this basically concludes it. These are our partners that we're working with. We've got a partner focused specifically on community engagement called Civic Edge. Our consultant that we're working with on the housing element preparation is Four Leaf, and then on the CEQA side is Rincon. So those are our folks that you'll be meeting in coming months. And then this is the last slide, the questions, discussion, and public input.
Thanks, Jenna. Any additional questions for staff?
Jenna, thank you very much. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you all for your great questions.
Thank you, Jana.
All right. With that, we'll move to item 7, items from the Planning Commission. Commissioner Austin Dillon, anything?
Not today.
All right, Commissioner Blanky.
Not from me. Thank you.
Vice Chair Lamb.
I have a question about signs. I remember when we first got on board, we talked about maybe we will have a programs to look at whether we want to update the signs requirement, because there were some commercial people were saying that our signs requirements are more rigid, or the codes are, more difficult to comply compared to other cities. So when is that coming up?
Yes, we're currently updating the sign ordinance. And so we will be coming to the Planning Commission kind of before we go to the City Council with that, with kind of some recommendations to the sign update. So that would be the time to do that, so.
And we are talking about like 6 months?
Well, no, we're actually on a relatively tight timeline on that, so you could see it as early as January.
Oh,
I mean, I don't want to promise January, but you could see it in January.
thank you.
Probably more likely February, but you could see it in January, yeah. And a lot of, and we're talking about several things. We're talking about kind of cleanup to the sign code, like, because it's not, a lot of it just isn't up to current court standards. Like it could, you know, there's some pieces of it that might not survive a legal challenge, for example. And then there's also lots of things that currently maybe go to the planning commission that don't need to go to the planning commission. Maybe there's some things that don't go to the planning commission that you want to see. So anyway, so we'll be presenting that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I forgot to ask you, Jeff, is there any update on the downtown at all?
I would have asked if you had, but,
No, we do hear information that the current owner is trying to sell it. So
Oh, wow.
To kind of
After all that?
yeah, after all that, that's all I know. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's too bad.
No.
Yeah.
well, so that means it could be years away from development. Anyway, okay.
On
Yeah.
another note,
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if this is time to share a personal story, but I'm gonna share it. You can stop me. But let me know. Leadership Rohnert Park, my pitch was selected. Thank you,
Oh.
both of you. Want to say
Great.
shout out to Fanny and Jeff because y'all helped me talk through some things. So hashtag engage RP, civic and community engagement is the pitch. And so now we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do, but that was the pitch and it won.
Oh,
So,
that's great.
yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Good.
good.
Housing and homelessness could always use a boost.
Yes,
Put that
yes,
out
so
there.
we're gonna talk about it, I
Great.
guess, tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow's our next meeting.
Tomorrow's the housing day.
Mhm.
Oh, good.
Awesome. All right.
Great.
I don't have anything, so we'll move to item 8, items from the Development Services staff. Anything, Jeff?
Oh, well, just the next meeting would be on January 13th, and Jennifer, do you know, do we specifically have an item for that yet, or? Oh, a sign program, okay, so we'll be having them, there's also election of officers.
And I just, you know, with that, I'd like to say I've had a fun year, you know, as chair, and I look forward to somebody else taking over. So, but it was good to be back here for the second half of it at least, so.
Well, you haven't been replaced yet, so.
Not yet, yeah.
So.
I suppose I could be reelected a second
Yes,
term, I suppose,
true.
but that said, you know, it's been enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you, you did great.
Your leadership has been awesome.
All right, with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.